good afternoon, everybody. My name is Constantin Tzembelicos. I'm the CEO for Orphic Group, but also managing partner for Mediterra Holdings, which is part of the Pegasus project, and also Element Aerospace, which is how I'm being introduced on this panel. I'm not going to present something related to the Pegasus research that we're doing, but I'm going to present something very different, which I think is relevant to a lot of the research that all of you are doing. And what I really like to do is look at, I want you to step away from academia for just a moment, and the science and the data, and step outside of the premises of this building into what's waiting for us out there when we're going to try to implement and show the new technologies and amazing research that you guys have all been doing. So my career has been primarily in aviation. Apart from entrepreneurship, I'm an aerospace engineer by profession as well, dabbled in R&D a bit in the beginning, then manufacturing, then a lot more operations in airlines, before completing my career in leasing and finance. And now, of course, in an advisory role. So most of my experience now is in industry. So I want to use a case study with Seaplanes to demonstrate to you some of the challenges that we could find with implementing UAM in the real world. And in doing so, why Seaplanes? Because we're in Greece, and Seaplanes are relevant to Greece. It's also recent history, which I'm going to tell you about these experiences I'm going to share with you. And there's a lot of parallelisms with what we tried to do by implementing Seaplanes, tried is the key word, to what we will probably likely face when we try to implement UAMs. So apart from the fact that I'm about to ruin your day and extinguish any hope you have for a bright future regarding this, what I'm really trying to hopefully achieve through this presentation is to make you more aware of some of the challenges that we have faced and that we will likely face when we try to implement UAMs in the real world. So before planes, right, of course, 1900 is at the beginning of the century, we had the first heavier than air flight, right? And very, very quickly, within 1910, we were already flying primarily seaplanes. Now, I picked this picture for a reason, because this particular airplane, the Astra, got Greece the famous title of being the first country in the world to use a seaplane in naval, maritime, military operations by dropping a few bombs from the airplane. But anyway, this was history, and Greece was part of it. By the 1920s, we were doing transatlantic intercontinental flights, right? Why? Because we really couldn't get, we didn't have airports back then, right? So we couldn't really get across the Atlantic. We would stop at a port, refuel, continue. But it was a faster way than boats. So 1920s was getting really popular with seaplanes. And by the 1930s, we were in the golden age. Now, you can see the word golden age. Why? I don't know if any of you have ever flown in an airplane like this, but that was the golden age of aviation. This is how people were flying back in the 1930s. But exactly. But what's more important here is the seaplane was very, very dominant. Why? Because there wasn't infrastructure. It could land on water. So why were they so prominent back then, right? Lack of runways. They didn't have them. Global accessibility. Planes could get there further and farther. And long distance travel, of course, right? That's why they became in the 30s very popular mode of travel. So they did lay the foundation for intercontinental travel. So what happened after World War II? Well, here comes the jet. By the 15s, we invented the jet engine. We started flying by jets. And look at this, by 1965, we were supersonic. That's a very short time frame. Remember, that's like 65. It's more time, that's longer from 65 to today than it was from 1903 or to 1965. By the way, this picture is the only picture ever taken of Concorde while in supersonic flight. So, what happened basically with aircraft, land-based aircraft versus seaplanes? Well, in the beginning it was all seaplanes. Now there's actually a bit of a spike here, but it's so small you can't see. But then all of a sudden with infrastructure, we saw a huge rise in land-based airplanes. Why? Because jets were more efficient, they were faster, they could travel farther, so of course they took, but they needed infrastructure. So this is an example you can see here from the 1900s and what's happening now. This is the CO2 footprint. It's an estimate, of course. CO2 footprint on airports, not on aircraft. So you can see how much infrastructure we ended up making. You look at who was from the ADP group, Charles de Gaulle is not a small airport, right? So how are seaplanes still relevant today? Minimal ground infrastructure. If you look at a seaplane basically needs a floating dock. Now, I'm not going to measure the floating dock, which could be like 13 square meters, but if I had an airport, a water airport. Now, remember, in this presentation, when we're looking at seaplanes, think of UAMs. When we're looking at water airports, think of vertiports, okay? There's a lot of things that you'll see are the same. But we have roughly 0.6 of an acre on a water airport per aircraft, whereas at a big airport, 90 to 150 acres per aircraft. Because look how much more infrastructure you need for that. The plane is parked in only 1 acre, but it needs a huge runway, a lot of taxiways, and all this other infrastructure. Also, the cost per acre for a water airport is 10 times less than what it costs to build a conventional airport. Another important thing, why seaplanes are still relevant today, and UAMs, point-to-point travel. You could save roughly an estimate 50 to 70% of your time by hopping on a UAM to go to your destination and going to the airport, to go to another airport, to take a taxi to get to your destination. And for cost savings, it could be 20 to 50%. Why? Because seaplanes, in fairness, aren't the most efficient form of aviation. They have a lot of drag, they're not that great, but for short distances, they actually end up being a better solution. And they have environmental sensitivity. These are places where only seaplanes are allowed to go because they have a very small impact on the environment. Great Barrier Reef, the most protected place on the planet in Australia. Lake Victoria in Tanzania. Glacier Bay in Alaska. Great Barrier Reserve in Tofino in BC. Patagonia, Fiji. Kamchatka Peninsula in Russia. All of these are highly, highly protected environmental places where forest reserves or people actually operate seaplanes because they have a minimum impact. So, will seaplanes likely become extinct? Well, no. When we're comparing them to UAMs, of course, right? Seaplanes will serve rural, coastal, and tourism-driven markets, while UAMs will dominate the urban, short-haul, grid-connected routes. So, they'll kind of have their niche markets. That's why both UAMs and seaplanes have their own story when it comes to the global picture. And I think we talked, I can't remember who it was, about intermodality and stuff like that. This is part of the picture, right? So what can UAMs do even better than seaplanes? Zero emissions, because most of them, eVTOLs, are based on electric propulsion. That's assuming, of course, that the electricity that goes into it is also, zero carbon. Quiet operations, because the tech is there. Higher frequency, because we could fly much more frequent with UAMs. They're like a shuttle. And more importantly, some of us, which in Pegasus we're working on that, Joanna, is autonomy, which is going to be, I think, a big game changer for that scene. Case study, here we are now. So what went seriously wrong with seaplanes in Greece, okay? So pretty much everything, okay? And there's proof of it. There is not a single seaplane operating in Greece right now. You'll see in a minute why. So I call these the 4 evil sins. Laws and regulations, licensing, adoption, and investment. Let's take a look really quickly. Laws and regulations, why? Fragmented delay regulatory framework was a main issue. There was an operation that operated, a modern operation of seaplanes that operated between 2003 and 2005, Air Sea Lines. Now, they didn't have legislation at the time. Now, don't confuse this. Aviation law like EASA is in place, but we're talking about legislation that has to do with what happens to the aircraft when it's on the ground in the water. So that legislation didn't exist. So what they did, they made a presidential decree, and they started operating with the hope that there would be legislation that would come very, very quickly. Well, it never did. So people got nervous. What did they say? How are we going to mitigate risk? Let's tell the airline that they can only fly 2 times a day. The less flights, the less likely something's going to happen. And of course, $25 million later, 3 years later, the company collapsed because it wasn't. It was 8 years later that the Greek government finally passed in Parliament the first seaplane legislation, 2013. So this is a big issue. Political and economic stability, as many of you know, during that time frame, we had changed 4 governments in 5 governments in 4 years. Nobody could make a decision. So that's a little bit outside of the box, but it was true and relevant to what's happening in Greece. Now, advisory. You need to properly advise the government with experts like you, because they have no idea what they're talking about. Greece, for many years, for over 10 years, thought that we only needed fueling stations in 5 locations throughout the whole country. That's enough to sustain a seaplane operation. Well, the Twin Otter, which is the most popular aircraft, can only do, it's a 19-seat airplane, but when you put floats on it, it's a 12-seat aircraft. And it can only do 120 nautical miles. So the red circles show what 120 nautical miles is. Great. But if you don't have a refueling station at your destination, you're down to the white circles. Well, what kind of an operation is that? That's nothing. Who's going to come and put their $25 million to start an operation with this? And it's only because they had no awareness on the performance parameters of the aircraft. Licensing and approvals, why? Complicated, lengthy licensing processing. This thing has literally killed seaplanes. There's 7 different ministries involved. None of them talk to each other. Ministry of Culture has to do, the archaeology department has to license a floating dock. This is the problem. And lack of inter-agency coordination. No one's the boss. 7 cooks, you know, say too many cooks and chefs in the kitchen? That's exactly what's happening here. There's no ownership. Why? This is an example. These white ones are today's 3 existing water airports. The red ones are the ones that are being approved as we speak. Remember the range map I told you about? Can he fly to here? No. Can he fly to here? No. The only person that could do is this. Because there's no planning. It's first come, first serve. Investment incentives. Government. Bring the seaplanes and we'll license the water airports. How would you feel about that if I had asked $10 from everyone you put in the pot on that promise? So, investment gaps. Nobody's going to come and start an operation in this place if they don't see the infrastructure that's in place, or at least a plan. And market uncertainty and seasonality. This is a really pet peeve for Greece. Greece, unfortunately, is still a seasonal market. We're like 6 months, and then the rest of it, it's, you know, we close Mykonos entirely. This doesn't help. Sustainability. 12 years, a month you need to fly, not 6. Otherwise, it's not sustainable. There's one parameter. So, where are we today? 3 licensed airports, 4 pending, 64 in the queue, and it's been 12.2 years in the making. So what happens when we want to put a vertiport on the roof of this building here next week? Can we bank on another 12 years before it gets approved? That's the track record today, guys. That's the reality I'm trying to wake everyone up to, is what we have to deal with and are still dealing with, because these 64 are still in the queue. Public acceptance. No kidding. I don't want seaplanes to operate in my area because it ruins my view of the ocean. Legit.
How many people have a view of the ocean?
So here's the thing. 1, 2, 3 people, you could pretty much find a way to push them under the rug. But you only need 20,000 people to be saying this, and you'll find 20,000 people to say this. Does everybody know what the NIMBY effect is?
Yes.
Not in my backyard. I don't want the metro because it's in my backyard. I don't want the landfill, it's in my backyard. Oh, I don't want a vertiport if it's in my backyard. So that's a big problem, and it's going to be a huge problem with drones, with UAMs, you all know it. Competition with ferries. That one, we really need to get over. A lot of people are saying this is the ferry business is the one that doesn't want seaplanes. It's a completely different sector. I won't get into that because I know we're pressed on time, but it's a big argument, and it comes down to a matter of education. People think something's a threat because they don't understand what it means and what it does. Seaplanes, if they come, they will fly routes that nobody's doing today, because there's either nobody's serving it, or there's no really good way to get there. An 8-hour boat ride is not good, so nobody's on it. Looking back, why is this a tragedy? This is Faliro, which is not too far from here, in the 20s. We had seaplanes in Greece in the 20s. We were flying from Corfu to Brindisi in the 20s. This is a water airport in Kerkira, Corfu, as some of you guys might know it. This was in the 20s, and today we're in 2025, and we've got nothing to show for it. Nothing. We've overcomplicated things for no reason at all. Do not repeat. I'm coming to the conclusion of my presentation here. Challenges and parallels between seaplanes and UAMs. So, infrastructure permitting, what we talked about, same as water airport licensing. Remember, 64 in the queue, 12 years. This is the thing, what do we need to do? We need a plan at a national level. We can't go to every island, every prefecture and say, do you want a water airport? Yes, I do. And then they put in the licenses and they wait for the federal government to do it, and the federal government's not interested. Federal government can say, we want vertiports. We're going to license the vertiports. Everybody has to execute. Top-down approach. Set standards early. Very important. The fueling station that I showed you guys earlier, the current law is a copy-paste of Athens International Airport. When you put a 1,000-gallon tank in Erikousa, which is an island in the middle of nowhere, they expect you to have the exact same standards as Athens International Airport, with a customs agent running around in the sun. In fact, they wanted people with, the original law wanted a guy in a boat with waving the airplane to land. Talk about reinventing the wheel, right? Top-down approach, and of course, very important for UAMs, power grids. We can't put a vertiport here if the local power company doesn't bring the appropriate infrastructure. That's another reality for site location, right? Regulatory airspace integration. I'm not going to get into this. Who was here at the airspace thing in Lisbon? Airspace World? 1, 2, okay. Not an easy walk in the park, right? Despite the technology, we need to leverage proven protocols. We need to keep regulatory burden proportional. The fuel thing is not proportional to the business in Greek legislation. And innovate with automation. This is the key part that you guys have a major role in. We need to innovate to make this simpler for people to digest and understand. Public acceptance, the big monster in the room. Public acceptance. We need to build trust early. We need to respect privacy. We need to make it affordable. Because if you bring the public, if this becomes a tool for the rich and famous, people aren't going to buy into it. But if it becomes closer to the everyday lives of people, they will start to accept it. We talked about this in some of the speakers were talking, I can't remember, anyway. And local partnerships, also very important to have local partnerships, local businesses, local residencies, whatever. If we don't get the public, educate them, and tell them why this is more important than just increasing the GDP, it has to affect their lives positively. Every single citizen, if it doesn't, and it's far from them, they will never adopt it. They will never want NIMBY. Liability frameworks, this is more about, remember, we've got UAMs flying over our heads in the city. Right now, a plane leaves from Athens International Airport, we're not even going to hear it. But UAMs will be all over our head. So we need to develop a public advisory board, demonstration flights to prove the technology is safe, incorporate next-gen tools, and educate both the government and the population. Very important. Final one, limited operating hours. With seaplanes, dawn to dusk. You can't fly after that. So summer's great, winter's horrible. With UAMs, we might have to honor the night, not because of operational restrictions, but because of noise. You don't want to be flying over someone's head at 12 o'clock at night or 1 in the morning. So we need to respect community rhythms. We need to start narrow and then scale up. We can't just go full-fledged. Let's start having 100 million of these flying over our heads, which won't happen really. And integrate with local multi-mode transport, which is a theme that you guys have been working on today. So, UAM strategy for seaplanes from lessons learned. 4 of them. Implement a top-down approach for regulation. It has to come from the minister, the office of the prime minister. If it doesn't, sorry guys, we're wasting our time. No matter how much we love it or anybody else loves it, if the order doesn't come from the top down, it's not going to happen, in my experience. Invest in infrastructure early. We could be sitting here 12 years for that to happen. So we need to start planning and building now to accommodate UAMs when they finally come to Greece a decade from now. Because realistically, in Greece, UAMs will be here about 10 years from now, not in 3 years. We're not the first market. Ensure public and community buy-in, right, acceptance, and streamline multi-agency regulation. One government entity to approve vertiports, not 10. They could do what civil protection did with the water firefighting aircraft. They brought in stakeholders. They brought in the representatives from the Hellenic Air Force. They brought representatives from the fire brigade, but they control the show. They're on loan. They're not sending papers out for approval to 15 different ministries. One controls the whole program. So, in conclusion, seaplanes, they didn't scale in Greece, but hopefully from those lessons, we could do it with UAMs. Thank you.
Thank you, Constantin. One question, please.
Yeah, it's very interesting study that, like, even if you prove that economy works,
Sorry, I can't hear.
even if you prove that economy works, that means you take tourism to all islands, and for the acceptance, make it sexy. Like people, the NIMBY effect doesn't work if it's sexy. If you have a Lambo in your backyard, you accept it. Still, it won't work. The seaplanes.
Well, you're making an assumption that because of that, it'll accept it. The hotel operations will love it. Hotel industry loves it. But the guy who has his little cottage on the thing has got nothing to gain from it unless he plans on coming with the seaplane, which could be.
But the cottage industry gets economy because more tourism comes to that island, and then he gets better livelihood.
Let me give you an example. I made an investment not too long ago in a building. I pumped in $2 million out of an investment in a building that raised the value of all the properties in the same building. You think people cared? No. All they cared about that there was a new business underneath their feet. They're not making rent, so they don't see the short-term gains. People are short-sighted. there's a category of people you will never convince because their brain capacity doesn't allow it. There's people that need convincing, but you need to educate them. And there's people that are already convinced, which is probably everyone in this room. But you will always have a large part of the population that just doesn't get it because they don't care for it, they don't want it. You can't eliminate that possibility. And that is a barrier. And unfortunately, you don't need half the island to be like that. You only need 10% of the island. And that's votes, that's problems, that's a million different things. So it's a delicate subject. It really is. But the benefits, of course we can show what the benefits are. Remember, society should work as a group, non-individually. Right? I don't know if people have a different opinion, but...
Okay, so
Yeah.
thank you.